Hey guys, it's me, Sam Stein, managing editor at the Bulwark. I'm here again with Bill Kristol and Andrew Egger. They are the co-authors of Morning Shots, one of the true influential newsletters in the morning. Get it in your inbox 9 to 9:30. We're actually going to talk about JD Vance, the vice presidential nominee, was on a podcast, the All In podcast, which is basically a bunch of Silicon Valley investment bros who talk about MAGA Republicanism and how much they love it. They had JD Vance on. One part in particular really stood out, which was on 4 different occasions, JD Vance was pressed on whether or not he would have certified the elections, the 2020 elections, like Mike Pence did infamously or famously in that election cycle. On 4 different occasions, Vance either refused to say whether he would or would not have done so.
Mike Pence, your new boss, Trump, is a little upset at Mike Pence because Mike Pence refused to overturn the election results. And if you were in that same position, what would you do? Would you have overturned the election results?
Well, I think let me take issue with the premise a little bit, Jason, because I don't think the argument was Mike Pence could overturn the election results. I think the argument was that Mike Pence could have done more, whether you agree or disagree. Mike Pence could have done more to sort of surface some of the problems in the 2020 election. Would you not certify the election?
Would you have not certified the
election?
Well,
I think that what I would have done, I mean, look, I happen to think that there were issues back in 2020, but two, the reason—
He was asked to not certify it.
Sure.
So would you have certified? I'll ask you for the third
Again,
time.
I would have asked the states to submit alternative slates of electors and let the country have the debate about what actually matters and what kind of an election that we had.
You
in
wouldn't have
important
certified,
states.
to be clear.
I would have asked the states to submit alternative slates of electors.
I think
that's what I would have done. Again, I've said that publicly many times. But
Bill, I want to get you first. Vance has kind of dabbled here before, so this is not terribly surprising, and yet it's shocking, right? We're in a position where someone could potentially be seated in that critical role of governance and not do what Mike Pence did.
It's shocking, but it's why Vance was picked. Trump, I believe personally, but I think especially Don Jr. and Tucker Carlson and the 3 of them as they talked, they did not want someone who was not an election denier. They didn't necessarily have to pick the absolutely most outspoken election denier, but Vance has been pretty consistent in refusing to go the Mike Pence road or even the kind of Mitch McConnell, let's just call it, more milder version of, well, no, it wasn't ultimately stolen path. And again, it tells you a lot about what the Trump-Vance administration will be like. Maybe he'll never have a chance to, it'll be 2029 by the time he has a chance to overturn an election, I suppose, as sitting a vice president. But it tells you the kinds of people who will be appointed to a Trump cabinet and a Trump White House. They will be JD Vance and further out. If you were an election certifier in 2020, you have no chance of being in my position, in my opinion, in a senior position in the next Trump administration.
I guess a lot of people, and maybe I'm crazy about this, but I think a fair number of people still hold on to this idea. Well, JD Vance, like Yale educated, kind of dipped his toes in venture capitalism and knows all these smart people. It's a smart guy himself. Like, surely this is an act. It's a bit of political theater. And if he actually were in that situation, well, then he would do the right thing. Is that crazy? I mean, I think he's telling us what he would do, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think like one of the things that Trump has always loved about JD Vance is that he has the zeal of a convert, right? I mean, he was formerly a big Trump opponent. He was formerly, sort of an early avatar of sort of a different kind of possible republicanism as he kind of came onto the scene. And he has completely made his calling card as he has switched into this new role. And as Bill said, the reason why he was picked is because he has led with the fact that he will be more pliant, more pliable, a better yes man, more reliable for anything Donald Trump might want to do than anybody else who was in the running. And I mean, people kind of look at JD out on the trail. They're like, wow, he's kind of terrible at this. He's awkward. He keeps getting in stepping on all these weird rakes. Like, plainly, he has not been picked because he's like an asset for the election. And that's true. I mean, Donald Trump's biggest takeaway from the Mike Pence era was that at the end of the day, if you pick one of these guys who's like 1 foot in, 1 foot out as like a bridge to reassuring a specific part of the Republican coalition, they might turn on you in the end at the critical moment. And so he was going to pick somebody all along who showed that they would never ever do that. And I think that's JD Vance.
Can I just add one point?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, Vance was one way to put it might be Vance was a Project 2025 pick, a governing pick, not the kind of governance I want, but a genuine authoritarian governing pick, not a tactical electoral pick, because as Andrew says, he didn't reach out to a broader part of the coalition. The footnote I would offer to that is, given that the race is now dead even, and maybe Trump took a little hit with Vance, but he seems to have come back to, pretty good to an even position. I wish I were more confident that it wasn't working as an electoral pick. Maybe the demagoguing, the shameless demagoguing on immigration, the really, shameless playing of the race and nativism cards. I don't know. I hope those don't work, but maybe Trump's not so stupid. Maybe he realizes that there's votes to be gotten there, and you don't lose as many of the, respectable Republicans as you might think.
Well, what struck me about the interview wasn't what Vance said, because we kind of expect Vance to say that stuff. It was what the hosts were saying and how they were reacting, right? Like, the hosts are there. They're, again, well-educated Silicon Valley types, extremely wealthy individuals, we assume smart. It's clear that they don't agree with Vance, right? Like, they're very evidently, I mean, the reason he was asked 4 times is because they thought Mike Pence did the right thing in certifying the election results, relying on certification go forward. It's also clear, as the topic in their podcast turns to immigration, that they also don't really agree with Vance, that they believe that there's merits to legal immigration. And of course, Couch is saying, we can't have open borders, but no one's saying, let's have open borders.
President Trump came on the podcast. We talked about, hey, maybe really talented people, we should recruit them to our country and give them green cards. But very quickly, your group walked that back a bit. It's such a political hot potato, and it doesn't seem to me that it needs to be, but you've spent a lot of time in government now. Why is this so weaponized by both of your parties?
Well, I think the reason why it's so difficult right now, and I mean, look, generally I agree that, okay, we're going to let some immigrants in. We want them to be high talent, high quality people. You don't want to let a large number of illegal aliens in. Obviously, I mean, look, this is, I'm sure, a very diverse crowd, and I'm sure there are a lot of immigrants in this crowd, legal immigrants, hopefully.
Your plan is to deport tens of millions of these people. Tell us how that will happen practically. How are you going to take millions of people, put them in cuffs, drag them out while people have their cell phones out recording this? Or is that just Trump being Trump?
Well, Jason, it's I like it.
You like the balance in the podcast?
Yeah, I do.
And yet they love JD Vance, and they're all voting for Donald Trump. So, like, why aren't these two things more salient for this crowd specifically? Is what gets me. It's like these are two very big issues, and yet they're willing to look beyond it for whatever reasons they have.
I mean, a huge majority of Republican senators and members of Congress are willing to look beyond it. The Wall Street Journal editorial board is willing to look beyond it. Most of the staff and National Review is willing to look beyond it. This has been the secret of Trump's success. I think it's not just the base. If the others had deserted him at any of the times they could have, including after January 6th, he would not be where he is today. So I think you're very right to point to that, Sam. It's a very indicative thing. They don't agree with him. They kind of dislike it. It makes them a little awkward. It's not really,
well, they're like begging him to say something different.
Yeah. They don't care.
Yeah.
How many follow-ups are you going to have about January 6th? We spend 20 minutes talking about it.
I want to hear David, especially if it gets me out of answering tough questions.
They're begging him to say something different. Like, they keep it.
But they're smart not to say anything different in a way, because they'll get no additional. They're already voting for Vance and for Trump, and this is more the immigration thing than the January 6th thing. That they think they can get additional votes with the nativism card and the race card and the immigration cards. And I wish I were more confident they were wrong.
Yeah, the most striking thing to me about that moment in the podcast is when they realized they weren't going to get that answer out of him on January 6th, then a different host steps forward and says, okay, well, now I have a question for you about policy. And JD Vance is like, yes, please, can we talk about policy? And it's just such a remarkable thing, because the vice president it's a weird job, right? I mean, you're basically the backup quarterback. You're there in case something happens to the main guy, but it's as if the backup quarterback in this one weird role has a button in his hand that can blow up the whole stadium, right? And it's refusing to certify the results of the next election. He has this largely ceremonial role that it turns out he could use to throw everything into a ton of chaos. That's an enormous policy question. I mean, like as far as the role of this guy is concerned, assuming, God forbid, nothing bad happens to Donald Trump if he's reelected in the next 4 years, it's really the only incredibly significant thing JD Vance will do is have to certify the next one. So the idea that these guys, and they do it, and you see it all across America, people do it, is kind of compartmentalizing January 6th and compartmentalizing the whole fact of what happened in 2020, of trying to short circuit the entire system and just trying to turn it into this kind of historical artifact, this weird thing that we all lived through. Boy, wasn't that strange. Now let's talk about policy. And he asked some questions about, tax rates and federal revenue. And it's just like, this is kind of the tunnel vision and the compartmentalization that is so much of a problem for Kamala Harris right now going into this race, is that there are way more people than we would think and hope would think this way about what happened in
well, it's like I was kind of like last week's conversation and got to the same thing, which was like there's one conversation happening about what should be the proper effective tax rate on unrealized capital gains, right? And then at the same time, Trump's like, you know what? I'm going to have a bloody deportation force and I'm going to jail all my political opponents. And you're like, oh my God, like we're operating on two very different planes. Not to mention that, the effective tax rate on capital gains, like there's a divided Congress isn't going to really change tax policy, if we're being honest about it. But a strong executive will go out and, go do a massive deportation force and will weaponize the Department of Justice. Like two things that are theoretical, but one is much more likely to happen.
Yeah, just the policy thing is itself phony, of course, because you know what? They don't agree with Vance on policy either. He's a protectionist. Trump's for tariffs. He's for, he's very much for industrial policy. These guys are presumably freewheeling, he doesn't like big tech, or at least he claims not to. And yet that doesn't matter either, because, it's not really about any of that. I think one really has to come to that somewhat dark view about a lot of the support.
So then what is it about
Trump
then?
and Vance. It's about hating the left. It's about, for these people, it's about having access to an administration that will take their calls and do them favors. They have decided that a kind of friendly corporatist administration is better than a, mildly liberal administration that might use antitrust and that might raise taxes a bit and so forth. So for them, it's probably that. For an awful lot of other people, I think it is more the grievances and the hostility to the cultural matters, the cultural war stuff.
I will say that there was one other section of the podcast, to your point, Bill, where they talked about Lina Khan.
I think what Lina Khan fundamentally gets correct is that big tech really is a threat. It's a threat to free speech. It's increasingly oligarchic. It controls too much of what we're allowed to say. And also, it controls a lot of the ways in which capital gets invested in these various ecosystems. But where I think Lina Khan goes wrong is that you're exactly right. Like, you need the singles and doubles. You need sometimes a medium-sized company to buy a smaller company for $300 million, right? That liquidates founders, that gives the venture fund some money to go back into the system. And I think that, I don't know her super well, but my basic read on Lina is that she is so anti-monopoly as sort of a baseline bias.
And JD Vance is like a big Lina Khan fan. He's one of those conservacons. And it's evident that they are very much not Lina Khan fans. They're like,
and they know that Trump is where they are. They know that Trump is where they are, not where JD Vance is on that. He does not take on big business ultimately, right?
No, and they were like, look, can you just get her to stop being against M&As? Like, we need these mergers and acquisitions. And Vance is like, I really like the stuff she does, but you're right. The mid-level mergers and acquisitions, we probably should have. Andrew, I can't leave without asking you, because we're talking about Vance and nativism and the culture war stuff. We're on like day 2 of this insane story about Haitian migrants in Springfield, Ohio. It's a conspiracy. It's phony. It's false. Allegedly abducting cats and eating them. It didn't happen. But Vance is back online, and he's like got to be one of the most online politicians, period, let alone vice presidential candidates or presidential candidates ever. So what are your thoughts on where we go with this wild story?
Yeah, it's hard to talk about any of these things because like what's in the news right now is this town of Springfield, Ohio. You guys talked about it in a video yesterday. You kind of covered the basics of like, yeah, there have been a lot of new Haitian migrants to this relatively
They're not. Can I just interrupt for a
city.
second? They are not migrants. They are legal immigrants to this country.
Yeah, they have temporary protected status.
They have temporary protected status. I dislike. I don't mean to be critical. We should not use the word migrants about these people. They are here legally. These are not people who snuck across the border and are hiding. from the border patrol. They are people who applied for this. Maybe they should change the rules on temporary protected status, but they were given that. So I just want to make that clear that this is how bad this is what they're doing. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry, Andrew.
Yeah, I feel like we're having some sort of like semantic dispute about the connotation of the word migrants. That's going over my head a little bit. They didn't start out here. I think that's what that term. But
they are here. Bill's right. They are here
Yes.
legally under the law. They are allowed to be here.
And moved to this town because there were jobs for them here. I mean, right? Like that's kind of the bottom line. And there's been some difficulties with that, some strains on social services and all these things. But none of that has been what has bubbled up. It's been these insane conspiracy theories that kind of bubbled up from a handful of like friend of a friend rumors on social media about these people supposedly, abducting and killing and eating people's house pets. I mean, stuff like that. And so JD Vance was spreading this stuff just yesterday. Just talking about that stuff specifically. And then here's a post what he said this morning. In the last several weeks, my office has received many inquiries from actual residents of Springfield who've said their neighbors' pets or local wildlife were abducted by Haitian migrants. For starters, this is still friend of a friend stuff. I mean, my neighbor, this happened to my neighbor. It's possible, of course, that all these rumors will turn out to be false. Do you know what's confirmed? That a child was murdered by a Haitian migrant who had no right to be here, that local health services have been overwhelmed, that communicable diseases have been on the rise, local schools have struggled to keep up with newcomers who don't know English. Rents have risen so fast, many Springfield families can't afford to put a roof over their head. I can't go through all of that stuff. Some of that stuff is wrong. I mean, like no child was murdered by a Haitian migrant. There was a car accident that a kid was killed in that a migrant was involved with. I mean, stuff like that. So but this is what's so infuriating to me about just JD Vance constantly is he still has this kind of like, there's this side of him that wants to do the kind of wonky thing, the policy thing, and like the earnest thing, like, well, here's what this is really about. But he's the one who was spreading the cat rumors just yesterday. I mean, that was what he was doing. And then later on, he's like, spare your outrage for your fellow citizens suffering under Kamala Harris's policies. Keep the cat memes flowing. It's like, no, you should actually continue to say that Haitian migrants are eating the cats for some reason because why? I mean, like the two sides of his brain, they don't meet anywhere. And yet he wants to still be able to do this like, oh no, really, I'm just concerned about, the fact that they've had to hire more ESL teachers at the local elementary school. And that's why we're going to continue this just torrent of filth about these people. That's just lies. And it's just, I mean, he does it about all kinds of things. Just to bring it back to the Mike Pence thing for 1 second. In that same podcast, the All In podcast, he's basically like, in the answer about Mike Pence, he's like, look, I don't really know Mike Pence. I think he's a fine guy. But I just think he hates Donald Trump because Donald Trump doesn't want us to get in a nuclear war with Russia. Mike Pence doesn't want to get us in a nuclear war with Russia. Or like constantly he'll be on the campaign trail and he'll get a question from a local reporter or something. He'll be like, now, oh man, another horrible question from the Lion Fake News. And then he'll kind of like laugh and be like he's kidding about it. But it's like, no, that's a terrible thing to say to some guy you just met. And he bounces back and forth between these two things constantly. And it gets on my nerves is all I'm trying to say.
What gets on my nerves is just racist. If I could just say one thing, we should say one word here that we have been too polite to say. It's racism. Why are we focusing on Haitian immigrants, incidentally? It's racism. I mean, they don't have, actually their English is a lot of them know English. Haiti is not that far away. A lot of them know Creole and French. It's a very easy language. So it's not the hardest language to get ESL teachers. It's not even worth getting into the things, the details, as Andrew says, though, because it's not really about any of the policies. If rents are going up, I guess they're actually working and paying, landlords. I mean, it's not about any of that. It's a pure dog whistle on race.
Yeah, and it's specific to Haitians. As someone who's been to Haiti on 3 occasions, it's a long-standing trope that Haitians are witch doctors, that they're primitive, that they of course would eat cats. It is racism. It's directed at a community that is dealing with the strain on social services, but it's still racism. And the really pernicious stuff is not like JD Vance being hyper online, which is crazy to me, and Andrew's points are valid. It's what comes next. It's all the right-wing characters who are going to now descend on Springfield. Andrew, you pointed it out in a Slack channel. There's a bunch of right-wing media types, MAGA media types who are now going to go into Springfield, put a target on these people, castigate them even more. And it's not hard to jump a couple steps ahead to where this ends up being something more problematic in terms of a confrontation. So yes, there are real life consequences to what JD's doing. And it's not just memes about cats. It can be much worse. On that uplifting note, Bill and Andrew, thank you both for joining us. Thank you all for subscribing or tuning in to the Bulwark YouTube channel. As always, do subscribe and then share this stuff. We really appreciate all your support. And thanks a bunch, guys. We'll talk later.